The Assyrian Empire was one of the most formidable powers in the ancient Near East, celebrated for its military innovations, cultural achievements, and infamous reputation for brutality. Its dominance peaked during the reign of King Sennacherib, 700–681 BCE, a ruler renowned for his military campaigns, urban planning, and the rebuilding of Nineveh. The Assyrian Empire grew from its origins in the city-state of Ashur, located near the Tigris River in modern-day Iraq. By the time of Sennacherib, the empire had already become a powerhouse, having subdued much of Mesopotamia, the Levant, and parts of Egypt. The Assyrians excelled in military strategy and siege warfare, deploying large, disciplined armies equipped with iron weapons, chariots, and battering rams. Their engineers built advanced siege engines, making them nearly unstoppable in battle. Sennacherib's reign marked a period of relentless conquest. His military campaigns targeted rebellious vassal states and neighboring kingdoms that dared to challenge Assyrian supremacy. Notably, in 701 BCE, he led a famous invasion of the kingdom of Judah. According to Assyrian records and the Bible, 2 Kings 18:19, Sennacherib besieged the fortified cities of Judah, including Lachish, which he captured in a brutal assault, depicted in the reliefs of his palace. The campaign against Jerusalem, ruled by King Hezekiah, is one of history's most debated events. The Bible records that the Assyrian army was mysteriously struck down, forcing Sennacherib to retreat, an event some attribute to divine intervention, or possibly a plague. The Assyrian records, however, only mention receiving tribute from Hezekiah, leaving the outcome ambiguous. Sennacherib's most enduring legacy was the transformation of Nineveh into a magnificent capital city. He rebuilt and expanded it, constructing massive walls, temples, and the palace without rival. He also oversaw the creation of a sophisticated canal system to supply the city with water, an engineering marvel of its time. Nineveh became a cultural and economic hub, showcasing the empire's wealth and grandeur. The Assyrian Empire's power was maintained through a calculated combination of fear and propaganda. Sennacherib, like his predecessors, used terror as a tool of subjugation. Prisoners of war were executed or enslaved, and rebellious cities were often razed. The Assyrians documented these actions in vivid detail on stone reliefs and inscriptions, designed to intimidate their enemies and assert their dominance. Despite its might, the Assyrian Empire's reliance on military conquest and harsh rule sowed the seeds of its downfall. After Sennacherib's assassination in 681 BCE, the empire continued to face internal strife and external threats. Less than a century later, in 612 BCE, Nineveh fell to a coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians, marking the end of Assyrian supremacy. The Assyrians left an indelible mark on history, influencing the cultures and political systems of the ancient world. Their achievements in administration, warfare, and urban planning set the stage for subsequent empires, even as their reputation for cruelty became a cautionary tale in the annals of history. The Kingdom of Judah, though relatively small and confined to the hill country of southern Israel, played a pivotal role in the biblical narrative and ancient Near Eastern history. By the time of King Hezekiah's reign, c. 715–686 BCE, Judah was under constant threat from larger, more powerful empires, particularly the Assyrian Empire, which had already conquered the northern kingdom of Israel, Samaria, in 722 BCE. Geopolitical context: a tiny kingdom among giants, Judah's strategic location along major trade routes connecting Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Levant made it a desirable but precarious land. After the fall of Israel, Judah was left as the sole remnant of the unified kingdom established by David and Solomon. However, this also meant Judah was isolated, with no immediate allies to shield it from aggressive powers. Assyria, under kings like Tiglath-Pileser III and Sennacherib, sought to dominate the region, demanding heavy tribute from vassal states like Judah. To the south, Egypt intermittently attempted to reassert its influence over Canaan, offering false promises of support to smaller kingdoms resisting Assyrian domination. Judah was often caught in the crossfire of these imperial ambitions. King Hezekiah was not only a religious reformer but also a shrewd and proactive leader, who recognized Judah's perilous position. He undertook several measures to strengthen the kingdom both spiritually and militarily. Hezekiah purged the land of idolatry, tearing down high places, smashing sacred stones, and destroying the bronze serpent that Moses had made, which had become an object of worship. His goal was to centralize worship in Jerusalem and reaffirm Judah's covenantal relationship with Yahweh. To Kings 18:1-6. He hoped this spiritual renewal would bring divine favor in the face of looming threats. Hezekiah fortified Jerusalem in anticipation of an Assyrian invasion. This included expanding the city's walls and constructing the Siloam Tunnel, a remarkable engineering feat that ensured a secure water supply by redirecting water from the Gihon spring into the city. He also stockpiled arms and provisions, preparing for a possible siege. Initially, Judah paid tribute to Assyria to maintain peace. However, Hezekiah later allied with other states and sought Egyptian support in a rebellion against Assyrian dominance. This decision, though bold, would provoke the wrath of Assyria and lead to one of the most critical moments in Judah's history. Sennacherib's campaign against Judah was swift and brutal. The Assyrian army, known for its overwhelming force and psychological warfare, captured numerous fortified cities, including the critical city of Lachish. The fall of Lachish is vividly depicted in Assyrian reliefs, showcasing the destruction and deportation of its inhabitants. Sennacherib then turned his attention to Jerusalem, laying siege to the city. According to the Bible, the Assyrian general Rabshakeh taunted Hezekiah and his people, mocking their faith in Yahweh and urging them to surrender. To Kings 18:28-37. However, Hezekiah turned to prayer and prophetic guidance, seeking counsel from the prophet Isaiah, who assured him of divine deliverance. Miraculously, the Assyrian army withdrew without breaching Jerusalem's walls. The Bible attributes this to a divine act, where an angel struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers overnight. To Kings 19:35. Historians suggest factors like a plague or logistical issues might have compelled the Assyrians to retreat. Though Jerusalem was spared, Judah remained weakened. The kingdom paid a heavy tribute to Assyria, and its territory was reduced. However, Hezekiah's faith and leadership left a lasting legacy. Judah's survival during this period preserved the Davidic line, setting the stage for future kings like Josiah, and sustaining the hope of messianic restoration. The story of Judah under Hezekiah is a testament to resilience against overwhelming odds. It illustrates how faith, leadership, and strategic preparation can sustain a nation even in the shadow of imperial powers. Though Judah's vulnerability persisted, its survival during this critical period ensured that the spiritual and cultural heritage of ancient Israel endured, influencing the development of Judaism and Christianity for centuries to come. The Assyrian Empire, under the command of King Sennacherib, 700–681 BCE, was at the height of its power, known for its military prowess and ruthless conquest. By 701 BCE, Sennacherib had embarked on a campaign to crush rebellion in the Levant and reassert Assyrian dominance. After subjugating numerous cities and nations, the mighty Assyrian army turned its attention to Jerusalem, the capital of the Kingdom of Judah. By the late 8th century BCE, the Assyrian Empire had become the superpower of the ancient Near East, its influence extending from Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean. Judah, a small but strategically located kingdom, had initially survived by paying tribute to Assyria. However, under King Hezekiah, Judah joined a coalition of nations, likely encouraged by Egypt, to rebel against Assyrian rule. Hezekiah's refusal to continue paying tribute was a bold but dangerous move. To prepare, he undertook significant defensive measures, including Hezekiah expanded and strengthened Jerusalem's defenses, building a broad wall to protect the city from siege warfare. Anticipating a long siege, Hezekiah commissioned the construction of the Siloam Tunnel, which diverted water from the Gihon spring into the city. This ensured that Jerusalem would have a reliable water source even if surrounded. Hezekiah amassed provisions and weapons, preparing his people for the possibility of a prolonged siege. Despite these preparations, Judah's military resources paled in comparison to the vast and seasoned Assyrian army. Sennacherib's campaign against Judah was devastating. The Assyrian army, equipped with advanced siege technology and disciplined troops, swept through the region, capturing many of Judah's fortified cities. Lachish, a critical city and military stronghold, fell to the Assyrians after a brutal siege. The victory at Lachish was so significant that Sennacherib commemorated it with detailed reliefs in his palace at Nineveh, depicting the city's destruction and the deportation of its inhabitants. Other cities and towns in Judah were similarly overwhelmed, leaving Jerusalem as the last major stronghold. Sennacherib's inscriptions record the systematic subjugation of Judah. As for Hezekiah the Judahite, I shut him up in his city Jerusalem like a bird in a cage. After securing most of Judah, Sennacherib turned to Jerusalem. The Assyrian army encircled the city, cutting it off from external aid. Sennacherib sent his field commander, Rabshakeh, to deliver an ultimatum to King Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem. Rabshakeh's speech, recorded in 2 Kings 18, 1937, was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Standing outside the city walls, he addressed the people directly, mocking Hezekiah's faith in God and his alliance with Egypt, which he called a broken reed. He claimed that Yahweh had abandoned Judah, and even suggested that the Assyrians were acting under divine mandate. The people of Jerusalem, following Hezekiah's instructions, remained silent, refusing to be demoralized. Faced with overwhelming odds, Hezekiah turned to prayer and sought guidance from the prophet Isaiah. Isaiah delivered a message of hope, assuring Hezekiah that Jerusalem would not fall, and that God would deliver his people. According to the biblical account in 2 Kings 19:35-36, a miraculous event struck the Assyrian army. During the night, an angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, leaving Sennacherib with no choice but to withdraw to Nineveh. The Assyrian annals make no mention of this catastrophe, instead claiming that Sennacherib received tribute from Judah. Historians speculate that a plague, famine, or other natural disaster might have forced the retreat. The Assyrian threat, Sennacherib's campaign against Jerusalem. The campaign of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, against Judah in 701 BCE was one of intimidation, devastation, and calculated psychological warfare. Having already subjugated much of the ancient Near East, the Assyrian king now turned his focus to Jerusalem. His efforts combined military might with psychological strategies, aiming to crush both the body and spirit of the people of Judah. Sennacherib, confident in his empire's military dominance, sought to demoralize the kingdom of Judah through scornful proclamations. He sent messengers to mock Judah's faith in their God and their king, Hezekiah. The Assyrian king claimed that Hezekiah had weakened Judah by removing the high places and altars dedicated to other gods, consolidating worship in Jerusalem. To the Assyrians, this monotheistic reform was a vulnerability, as it limited the number of deities Judah could call upon for protection. Defying the God of Israel, Sennacherib declared that no god of any nation had ever saved their people from Assyria's power. From Aram to Babylon, every kingdom had fallen, their gods proven powerless. In his arrogance, Sennacherib equated the God of Israel with the powerless idols of other nations, stating, "Do not let Hezekiah deceive you when he says, 'The Lord will deliver us.' Has the God of any nation ever delivered his land from the hand of the king of Assyria?" 2 Kings 18:33-35. This blasphemous claim was designed to instill despair, portraying resistance as both futile and foolish. Sennacherib's envoy, Rabshakeh, played a key role in the psychological campaign against Jerusalem. Standing outside the city walls, he addressed the people in Hebrew, the language of Judah, rather than Aramaic, the diplomatic language of the time. This deliberate choice ensured that the common people, not just Hezekiah's officials, would hear and understand his threats. Rabshakeh mocked Hezekiah's leadership, claiming he was misleading the people by encouraging trust in Yahweh. He questioned the king's ability to protect the city, highlighting Judah's inferior military strength and lack of foreign allies. Rabshakeh promised the people safety and prosperity if they surrendered, claiming they would receive fertile lands and a comfortable life in exile under Assyrian rule. However, he warned that trusting Hezekiah and resisting Assyria would lead to starvation, destruction, and death. Rabshakeh derided Judah's faith in Yahweh, implying that the God of Israel was powerless against the might of Assyria. He attempted to shake the people's confidence, suggesting that even their God had abandoned them. Despite these provocations, the people of Jerusalem obeyed Hezekiah's orders and remained silent, refusing to respond to Rabshakeh's taunts. With negotiations failing to yield Judah's surrender, the Assyrians prepared for a full-scale assault on Jerusalem. The Assyrian army, known for its discipline and engineering skill, surrounded Jerusalem, cutting off supplies and access to the outside world. This tactic was designed to weaken the city through starvation and despair before a direct attack. The Assyrians were masters of siege warfare. Their army deployed battering rams, siege towers, and sappers to breach city walls. The fall of Lachish, depicted in detailed reliefs in Sennacherib's palace at Nineveh, demonstrated the efficacy of these tactics. The Assyrians used fear as a weapon, leaving conquered cities in ruins and deporting their inhabitants. Survivors who witnessed Assyrian brutality would spread tales of their might, discouraging resistance. Jerusalem now faced this same threat. Inside Jerusalem, King Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah urged the people to trust in Yahweh rather than succumb to fear. Hezekiah sought divine guidance, praying fervently and encouraging the people to remain steadfast. Isaiah assured them that the city would not fall, proclaiming God's sovereignty over the arrogant Assyrians. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation between Assyrian power and the faith of Judah. The outcome would not only determine the fate of Jerusalem but also serve as a profound statement about divine deliverance against seemingly insurmountable odds. As the Assyrian army encircled Jerusalem and Sennacherib's threats echoed through the land, King Hezekiah demonstrated a remarkable response rooted in faith and humility. Rather than relying on military strength or foreign alliances, Hezekiah turned to prayer and sought the intervention of Yahweh, the God of Israel. His leadership during this critical time became a powerful example of trust in God's sovereignty. In the face of overwhelming odds, Hezekiah chose to bring the matter before God, symbolically presenting the Assyrian king's blasphemous threats at the heart of Judah's spiritual life, the temple in Jerusalem. When Hezekiah received a letter from Sennacherib mocking Judah's God and threatening annihilation, he took it into the temple and spread it out before the Lord. This act symbolized his complete dependence on God and his acknowledgement that only divine intervention could save Judah. To Kings 19:14-15. In his prayer, Hezekiah addressed God with reverence, recognizing him as the creator and ruler over all nations. O Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. To Kings 19:15. Hezekiah's prayer demonstrated his faith in God's supreme power over the Assyrians, rejecting the idea that the God of Israel could be compared to the powerless idols of other nations. Hezekiah's plea was not motivated solely by a desire for Judah's survival, but by a deeper purpose, to uphold God's name and demonstrate his glory to the nations. Hezekiah humbly admitted Judah's inability to defend itself against Assyria, casting the nation's fate entirely into God's hands. This humility stood in stark contrast to Sennacherib's arrogance. Hezekiah prayed for deliverance not merely for the sake of Judah's people, but so that the nations of the world would recognize Yahweh as the one true God. Now, Lord our God, deliver us from his hand, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God. 2 Kings 19:19. This plea reflected Hezekiah's understanding of Judah's role as a witness to God's sovereignty and faithfulness. In response to Hezekiah's prayer, the prophet Isaiah delivered a message of divine assurance. Isaiah declared that Sennacherib's arrogance and blasphemy would not go unchallenged, Isaiah's prophecy included a vivid rebuke of Sennacherib, emphasizing that the Assyrian king's conquests were only possible because God had allowed them. Sennacherib's pride would lead to his downfall. Whom have you insulted and blasphemed? Against whom have you raised your voice? Against the Holy One of Israel. 2 Kings 19:22. Isaiah assured Hezekiah that Jerusalem would not fall to the Assyrians. God himself would defend the city, demonstrating his power and fulfilling his covenant promises. Hezekiah's response to the Assyrian threat serves as a timeless example of faith under pressure. His refusal to trust in human strength or alliances and his unwavering reliance on God became a defining moment for Judah. It reinforced the centrality of prayer, humility, and the recognition of God's sovereignty, inspiring generations to trust in divine power, even in the face of insurmountable challenges. This moment of deliverance would not only secure Jerusalem's survival, but also affirm the enduring truth of Hezekiah's prayer, that Yahweh alone is God over all the kingdoms of the earth. In the darkest hour of Judah's crisis, when the mighty Assyrian army stood poised to destroy Jerusalem, the prophet Isaiah brought a message of unparalleled hope and reassurance from God. His words not only fortified the faith of King Hezekiah and the people but also highlighted God's sovereignty and faithfulness to his promises. Assurance from God, Jerusalem will be untouched. Isaiah's prophecy directly countered the terrifying boasts of Sennacherib and his envoy. While the Assyrian king exuded confidence in his ability to conquer Jerusalem, Isaiah revealed that God had decreed otherwise. No assault on Jerusalem. Isaiah declared that Sennacherib would fail to even approach the city, let alone capture it. He will not enter this city or shoot an arrow here. He will not come before it with shield or build a siege ramp against it. 2 Kings 19:32. This promise of divine protection was extraordinary, given the Assyrians' proven track record of military conquests and their advanced siege tactics. God's message, delivered through Isaiah, was clear. Sennacherib would not achieve his ambitions. Instead, he would retreat in disgrace. By the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter this city, declares the Lord. 2 Kings 19:33. This prophecy directly challenged Sennacherib's arrogance, showcasing the futility of his plans against the will of God. God's promise, a defense for his name and covenant. Isaiah's prophecy emphasized that the deliverance of Jerusalem would serve a greater purpose than mere survival. It would affirm God's glory and faithfulness to his covenant. God declared that he would defend Jerusalem to uphold his reputation as the true God. I will defend this city and save it, for my sake and for the sake of my servant David. 2 Kings 19:34. This divine action would refute the blasphemous claims of Sennacherib, who had mocked Yahweh as powerless. God's intervention would demonstrate to all nations that he alone is sovereign over history and the affairs of men. For the covenant with David, Isaiah's prophecy also reminded Judah of God's enduring promise to King David, that his dynasty would endure. The preservation of Jerusalem and the Davidic line were integral to God's plan, ultimately leading to the coming of the Messiah. A prophecy fulfilled, the angel of the Lord. Isaiah's words were not empty promises. They were fulfilled with dramatic precision. According to the biblical account, the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one night. 2 Kings 19:35. This miraculous event forced Sennacherib to abandon his campaign and return to Nineveh in humiliation. The prophecy's fulfillment not only saved Jerusalem, but also affirmed Isaiah's role as God's messenger, and underscored the power of divine intervention against human arrogance. Legacy of Isaiah's prophecy. Isaiah's prophecy remains a powerful testimony to God's sovereignty. No power, however mighty, can thwart the purposes of God. Faithfulness to promises. God's covenant with David and his people endures through every trial. Hope in adversity. Even when faced with overwhelming odds, faith in God's promises provides strength and deliverance. Through Isaiah, the people of Judah learned that their survival depended not on military might or political alliances, but on their trust in Yahweh, the Lord of hosts. This episode became a cornerstone of faith, inspiring future generations to rely on God's power and faithfulness. Divine intervention. God's miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem. The confrontation between the mighty Assyrian Empire and the small kingdom of Judah reached a climactic moment with an act of divine intervention that showcased God's power and faithfulness. At the brink of destruction, God himself acted to deliver his people, fulfilling his promises through a miraculous and decisive event, the angel of the Lord. As the Assyrian army camped outside Jerusalem, preparing for a final assault, God sent his angel to intervene. A miraculous strike. In a single night, the angel of the Lord moved through the Assyrian camp and struck down 185,000 soldiers. The scale of this divine act was staggering, instantly neutralizing one of the most formidable military forces in the ancient world. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 men in the camp of the Assyrians. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. 2 Kings 19:35. This event demonstrated that the deliverance of Judah was not by human effort but by God's sovereign power, God's supreme authority. The destruction of the Assyrian forces was not only a military victory but a spiritual declaration. It proved that the God of Israel was not like the powerless idols of the nations Sennacherib had conquered. Yahweh's power was unmatched, and his defense of Jerusalem was undeniable. When the surviving Assyrians awoke to find their camp filled with the bodies of their comrades, they were gripped with fear and panic. The Assyrian army, once unstoppable, was now shattered and demoralized. The humiliated Assyrian king had no choice but to abandon his campaign and retreat to Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. His once boastful declarations of conquest turned to silence as he returned in disgrace. The miraculous defeat sent shockwaves through the ancient Near East. Sennacherib's failure to capture Jerusalem, despite his overwhelming resources, stood as a testimony to God's protection over his chosen people. For Judah, it was a moment of vindication and faith, affirming that their reliance on God was not in vain. Although Sennacherib escaped Jerusalem, his life ended in tragedy. According to biblical and historical accounts, he was assassinated by his own sons while worshiping in the temple of his god Nisroch. 2 Kings 19:37. This ironic demise further underscored the futility of opposing the God of Israel. The divine intervention that saved Jerusalem became a defining moment in Judah's history and a cornerstone of faith, a testament to God's power. The destruction of the Assyrian army highlighted God's ability to protect his people against impossible odds, reinforcing the belief that his power was greater than any earthly empire. The miraculous defeat of Assyria served as a warning to the surrounding nations. Those who defy the God of Israel do so at their peril. The story of this deliverance inspired future generations of Jews, reminding them of God's faithfulness to his covenant and his willingness to act on behalf of his people when they place their trust in him. Through this event, God not only saved Jerusalem but also demonstrated his sovereignty, ensuring that his name and his covenant with David would endure for all time. The life and reign of Sennacherib, the once mighty king of Assyria, ended in humiliation and tragedy. His dramatic downfall highlighted the consequences of defying the God of Israel, fulfilling the prophetic warnings of Isaiah and underscoring the limits of human arrogance in the face of divine sovereignty. After the miraculous destruction of his army outside Jerusalem, Sennacherib retreated to Nineveh, the capital of his vast empire. The proud king who had mocked Judah's God and proclaimed his own invincibility returned home in disgrace. The devastating loss of 185,000 soldiers and his failure to capture Jerusalem tarnished his reputation and shook the image of Assyrian supremacy. For Sennacherib, the retreat to Nineveh was not just a tactical withdrawal, but a humbling acknowledgement that even the greatest earthly powers are subject to the will of God. His defeat became a symbol of the futility of human pride when it stands in opposition to divine authority. Sennacherib's life came to an end in a manner both ironic and tragic, fulfilling Isaiah's earlier prophecy that he would fall in his own land. While worshipping in the temple of his god Nisroch, Sennacherib was assassinated by two of his sons, Adrammelech and Sharezer. One day, while he was worshipping in the temple of his god Nisroch, his sons Adrammelech and Sharezer killed him with the sword, and they escaped to the land of Ararat. 2 Kings 19:37. This act of betrayal by his own family symbolized the ultimate collapse of his authority and the fragility of his empire's internal stability. The setting of Sennacherib's assassination, the temple of his god, was deeply ironic. The very deity he worshipped was powerless to save him, just as the gods of the nations he conquered had failed to protect their people. Sennacherib's demise was a direct fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy, which foretold that the king would not enter Jerusalem and would die in his own land, 2 Kings 19:7. This demonstrated the reliability of God's word and the ultimate triumph of his justice. Sennacherib's story serves as a powerful warning against pride and defiance of God. His boasts, military conquests, and mockery of Yahweh ultimately led to his undoing. For Judah, Sennacherib's downfall reinforced the belief in God's sovereignty and his faithfulness to protect his people. It became a testament to the power of faith and the futility of human arrogance. While Assyria continued to wield power for a time, Sennacherib's death marked the beginning of the empire's slow decline. The same God who delivered Judah would eventually orchestrate the fall of Assyria itself, as foretold by the prophets. Through the downfall of Sennacherib, history witnessed the truth that no king, empire, or power can stand against the will of the Lord of hosts. The account of Hezekiah, Jerusalem's deliverance, and Sennacherib's downfall is rich with spiritual truths and enduring lessons. These themes resonate across time, reminding believers of God's power, faithfulness, and justice. God's sovereignty. The story underscores the supreme authority of God over all creation, including the mightiest empires and their rulers. Control over history. The Assyrian Empire, though unparalleled in its military strength, was powerless before the will of God. The miraculous defeat of their army demonstrated that no human force can thwart his plans. God's name glorified, Sennacherib's arrogance was silenced, and the nations witnessed that Yahweh, the God of Israel, reigns supreme. Faith over fear. In the face of overwhelming odds, King Hezekiah exemplified the power of faith. Trust in God, not man. Instead of seeking alliances or relying on military strength, Hezekiah turned to prayer, placing his confidence in God's promises. A model for believers, Hezekiah's actions remind us to cast our burdens on God, trusting Him to deliver us even when the situation seems hopeless. Judgment on arrogance. Sennacherib's downfall serves as a stark warning against pride and defiance of God. Consequences of mockery. By ridiculing the God of Israel, Sennacherib invited divine judgment. His defeat and assassination were a direct result of his arrogance. God opposes the proud. This theme echoes throughout Scripture, affirming that pride leads to destruction, while humility leads to grace. Proverbs 16:18. Divine protection. The miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem reveals God's unwavering commitment to His people, faithfulness to His promises. God's covenant with David ensured the preservation of Jerusalem, showcasing His reliability in keeping His word. A source of hope. The intervention reminds believers that God is a refuge in times of trouble, capable of delivering His people from their darkest trials. Application for today. Rely on God's power in moments of crisis. Trust that God is in control, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Stay humble. Avoid the pitfalls of arrogance and remember that all achievements are subject to God's will. Seek God in prayer. Like Hezekiah, present your concerns to God, confident in His ability to act. Remember His faithfulness. God's deliverance of Jerusalem stands as a timeless reminder of His love and care for His people. This story is a profound testimony to the truth that God's power, justice, and mercy endure forever, offering hope and inspiration to those who place their trust in Him. The story of King Hezekiah, Jerusalem's miraculous deliverance, and Sennacherib's downfall transcends its ancient context, offering timeless lessons for believers navigating challenges in today's world. Trust in God's power. A present help. Just as God defended Jerusalem against the overwhelming might of Assyria, believers can trust that He remains active and powerful in their lives today. Whether facing personal trials or societal challenges, God's strength is sufficient. Faith over circumstances. When confronted with impossible situations, The story reminds us to focus on God's ability rather than our limitations. As he demonstrated his sovereignty over the Assyrians, he continues to rule over every situation in the modern world. Standing firm in faith. Facing intimidation, like the people of Jerusalem, believers often encounter voices of doubt and fear. Whether it's societal pressures, discouragement, or direct opposition, the story encourages standing firm in faith, trusting God for deliverance. Faith in action. Hezekiah's response, turning to God in prayer and seeking wise counsel, serves as a model for believers to actively engage their faith in the face of adversity. God's justice. Hope for the oppressed. In a world often marked by injustice, the story reassures believers that God sees, knows, and will act. Sennacherib's defeat reminds us that those who mock or oppose God will ultimately face his judgment. A call for patience. God's justice may not always be immediate, but it is certain. The story of Sennacherib's demise encourages believers to trust in God's timing and sovereignty over all circumstances. Application for daily life. Dependence on prayer. Like Hezekiah, present your fears, challenges, and uncertainties to God, trusting in his wisdom and power to act. Courage and faith. When faced with challenges, stand firm in the knowledge that God is greater than any opposition. Rest in God's justice. In times of injustice or trial, remember that God's judgment is sure, and his plans are always for the good of his people. Proclaim his power. Share the story of God's deliverance, both ancient and personal, as a testimony to his enduring faithfulness. A timeless assurance. The story of Jerusalem's deliverance is more than history. It is a reflection of God's unchanging character. For modern believers, it offers comfort, encouragement, and a challenge to live with unwavering trust in the one who defends, delivers, and reigns over all. The miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem and the downfall of Sennacherib are recorded across several biblical texts. Each account highlights different aspects of the event, emphasizing themes of faith, prophecy, and divine intervention. 2 Kings 19:30-37. This passage provides the primary historical account of the event, including Isaiah's prophecy, assurance that Sennacherib will not enter Jerusalem or attack it. v. 30-34. Divine intervention. The angel of the Lord strikes down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. v. 35. Sennacherib's retreat. The humiliated king returns to Nineveh. v. 36. Sennacherib's death. He is assassinated by his sons while worshipping in the temple of his god Nisroch. v. 37. Isaiah 37, 33-38. The prophet Isaiah recounts the same events, aligning with his earlier prophecies. God's promise. Sennacherib will not attack Jerusalem, or even come near it. v. 33-35. God's action. The angel of the Lord destroys the Assyrian army. v. 36. Sennacherib's fate. His assassination fulfills Isaiah's prophecy. v. 37-38. This passage emphasizes God's sovereignty and the fulfillment of his word through Isaiah. 2 Chronicles 32, 20-23. This account provides an additional summary with a focus on Hezekiah's faith, Hezekiah's prayer. Hezekiah and the prophet Isaiah cry out to God for help. v. 20. God's response. The Lord sends an angel to destroy the Assyrian forces. v. 21. Sennacherib's retreat and death. The king returns to Nineveh in disgrace and is killed by his sons. v. 21. Aftermath. Hezekiah's faith is vindicated, and God is glorified as nations bring offerings to Jerusalem. v. 20-23. Themes across the accounts. Faith and prayer. Hezekiah's reliance on God and the prophetic intercession of Isaiah are central. God's sovereignty. The miraculous intervention underscores his power over nations and kings. Judgment on arrogance. Sennacherib's defeat and death highlight the consequences of mocking God. Divine protection. Jerusalem's deliverance demonstrates God's faithfulness to his covenant and his people. These passages together form a cohesive narrative of God's power, justice, and mercy, inspiring faith and trust in his providence. May your spiritual journey be filled with God's grace and peace. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video to inspire others on their walk with the Lord.